Hello, and once again, thank you very much for coming along to EcoViews and News. This week we've got a major crisis on our hands on the East Coast. Those of you who have been watching these things know what I'm referring to, but it's basically the huge tragedy in the middle part of the Atlantic coastal area, from New Jersey right on through Connecticut. It has been hit by a major tropical storm. We're fortunate in a way that it wasn't a hurricane. By the time it hit the shore, it was a tropical storm. Others have predicted that a hurricane of Category 3 or above would totally devastate New York City. But as it is, it's pretty bad. It's very bad. In fact, for all of northern New Jersey, large parts of New York, and Connecticut. And we want to look at that, in particular in reference to the kinds of policies that you might develop as a human community in reference to it. It's not going to be the last that we see. I have no powers of prediction here, but the question is, we are in need of major public assistance programs at this point, and yet we're being led down the path of private sector response in respect to what our leadership is trying to do. Now, just in terms of review, I asked last week, you recall, before the hurricane struck and before it hit land as a tropical storm, Sandy, it was moving up the coast, and I asked the question very directly last week at this time, what will it take, in some sense, to alert and make us aware in this whole region of what these potentials are for storms like this. And they were basically tracked ahead of time by a whole series of different computer models. And it's not as if it snuck up on us with a surprise, but the computer models had some variation. Almost all of them, though, took a sharp turn here to the left just before New York, somewhere between Baltimore and New York, right on the New Jersey coast. And sure enough, that's what seemed to be involved by looking at this upper level wind flow and the high that dominated this area up over Labrador, that blocked the hurricane from moving up over the ocean and turned it into a tropical storm and in effect sent it in overland. That's in effect what happened. And what would it take for us to realize this could occur? Well, a direct hit. In many respects it was a direct hit, even though if it was less powerful than it could have been, it had come down to a tropical storm at this point. But the hit was pretty direct on this whole region of the coast, and if you're not in that region, it'll take some imagination to see what's involved here. It's really quite staggering. The reports on it were available in the news, and you can see some of these things early on in their manifestations here. The MSNBC carried some of the news, and it's worth reviewing it in a bit. Let's see if we can pull it in from here, because the problems involved in it were worth reviewing as a group. Take a look. They've been made available in the Clearinghouse for Environmental Course Material by the academics under environmentaljusticetv.wordpress.com if you want to check them out and look into these particular reports. They're really quite staggering. This one was from MSNBC and may well have an ad in front of it, which we can tolerate for a bit, but we'll see if it runs the ad. I'll mute it in any case. Yeah, you'll see the ad first, which seems a little bit sad and beside the point, obviously, in the face of this kind of tragedy. But look, days after the hurricane, true devastation becomes apparent, is the title of the story that Brian Williams ran in the evening. Take a look.
Of this country, including the most densely populated region of the United States, in the grips of an enormous and ongoing crisis tonight. This is another dark, cold night for millions of people, and just today, for a lot of people, things started feeling a little unhinged because some of the machinery of a civil society has stopped working. Houses are ripped apart, people don't have power, they can't buy gasoline, kids aren't going to school, some don't have access to food or water. Some New Yorkers were looking for still fresh food in dumpsters today that stores had thrown out. The damage stretches for hundreds of miles. The death toll after rising again today stands at 94. And now we're seeing anger as officials learn for the first time of places that are devastated and cut off and not getting help. We begin tonight with NBC's Savannah Guthrie.
72 hours after Sandy walloped the eastern seaboard from southern New Jersey to Connecticut and beyond, some things are getting better and some worse, particularly on Staten Island, where today the true devastation became apparent. The death toll is rising, and so is the anger.
They're still looking for dead bodies, people that are held unaccountable for it. So this death toll is going up. But you need to come here and help us. We need assistance, please.
We have bodies being removed up the block. We are devastated here. There is no Red Cross.
Thousands of families left homeless continue to search through the debris to salvage what little is left. And as temperatures drop, officials say power won't be fully restored for days. In some New York and Connecticut suburbs, at least another week in the dark. Elsewhere, cleanup and repair efforts continue while patience wears thin.
I have two 20-month-old babies, and my cars are underwater. I don't have transportation out of here. And what are we supposed to do? We heard from a National Grid guy that power's going to be out for 6 weeks.
New York's Mayor Michael Bloomberg promised more help is on the way.
We'll begin distributing thousands of bottles of water and thousands of pre-prepared meals at a number of locations in hard-hit areas.
The mayor says the city remains safe with few incidents of looting. And this Sunday's New York Marathon is on. A controversial decision because it will bring as many as 30,000 runners into the already struggling city, weaving through all 5 boroughs. Today, getting around storm-damaged areas at times felt like an exercise in futility. Huge lines are forming wherever drivers can find a gas station that has power and working pumps.
We've been like, what, 2.5 hours? Yeah. 2.5 hours.
How many gas stations did you pass before finding this one?
All of them. I don't know, 20, 30.
And a new rule that limits cars coming into New York City to only those with at least 3 passengers caused miles of incredible backups at checkpoints. There is some good news. Partial subway service was restored, and the Army Corps of Engineers is helping to empty a number of still flooded tunnels. How much water are we talking about that you're going to need to pump out?
Our estimates right at this point in time are 300 to 400 million gallons of water.
One silver lining from Sandy, the floodwaters killed at least a few of the millions of rats that have been the menace of subway stations. But drinking water remains unsafe in many communities. Floodwaters filled with a toxic brew of raw sewage and chemicals are making cleanup even harder.
Insurance companies are telling us to empty our houses out, to clean the stuff and leave it in our property. But is it safe for us to breathe in that stuff? It's all toxic. It's raw sewage.
In Coney Island, the New York Aquarium remains flooded. Staffers are pumping the dirty water as fast as they can. But if they can't clear it soon, they'll have to somehow move all the animals. And along the battered Jersey Shore, in those apocalyptic scenes of destruction, in Seaside Heights, one man got a first look at his destroyed business.
We just cried out back there. It's an emotional thing, you know, to lose everything like that with one night storm.
Finally, in places like Hoboken, New Jersey, a city that was overwhelmed with flooding, those lucky enough to have power are sharing it with those who don't. And people like Maggie Mallon are opening their homes for anyone who needs a hot meal.
I was just so honestly incredibly grateful that I had everything still intact, that all I could do was pay it back and pay it forward.
Instantly becoming one of a growing number of everyday heroes.
So that's kind of what we're dealing with here tonight. Savannah Guthrie starting us off this evening.
Okay, well, you can get the sense of devastation here that's really quite pronounced and not temporary. It's not going away. In fact,
the anger is building in New York tonight. Anger, as you saw, over the fact that the city thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and host the New York City Marathon this weekend, despite power outages and standing water. And anger is boiling, as you also might have seen in Staten Island, a part of New York closer to New Jersey, surrounded by water, temporarily cut off from the rest of the world, and suffering. NBC's Ann Curry is there.
Okay, now you get the sense of what's happening here. There are parts of New York that are revived, and within 2 days, Wall Street, right, is back and running. Then there are whole boroughs like Staten Island, and the anger got so intense that Bloomberg had to cancel the marathon. The whole idea of people running between borough to borough, even helping out with relief, was too much for most citizens to take, and he canceled it. It's back to the drawing boards on many things. Take a look at the anger in Staten Island.
It's becoming clear that Staten Island, an area 3 times the size of Manhattan, with about 500,000 people, suffered some of the greatest losses in all of New York. So far, 19 bodies have been recovered here. And while many of the deaths occurred in evacuation areas, today residents complained about a lack of desperately needed help, and their anger exploded.
We need help immediately. We have nowhere to live. We have small children that have to go back to school on Monday that have no clothes to wear, and we cannot live in our homes. Something has to be done immediately, not 14 days from now, today.
Staten Island was the bullseye of the storm. FEMA's not here. They're in New Jersey, they're in Breezy Point, they're everywhere, they're not on Staten Island. Every single person on this block lost everything.
How many people have died on this block?
You know how many people died on this block? I haven't seen it on the news. They're pulling bodies out.
It's hard to imagine anyone could neglect Staten Islanders when their stories are so harrowing. Local reports say the seawater rose so fast it was upon them in minutes. There was an off-duty police officer, Arthur Kasperzak, who rushed his family to safety in his attic and then is thought to have been electrocuted. And there was little Diane Norris could do but stand inside her living room holding her 89-year-old mother as the water rose. Her mother drowned. And this afternoon, in a Staten Island marsh, the latest tragic discovery, the bodies of 2 boys, 2 and 4, dragged from their mother's arms by powerful floodwaters as she was trying to find help. The tragedy here is so immense, some residents fear they haven't seen the end of it.
They're still looking for dead bodies, people that are held unaccountable for, so this death toll is going up. But you need to come here and help us. We need assistance, please.
Staten Island Borough President James Molinaro directed his frustration at the Red Cross.
And the American Red Cross was nowhere to be found. So all the American Red Cross, all these people making these big salaries should be out there on the front line, and I am disappointed.
The Red Cross says it is working to set up a mobile food kitchen and has 10 emergency vehicles on the way. And today, some help was in plain view on Staten Island. Emergency teams went house to house checking for signs of life, marking each home just as was done in New Orleans. NYPD Inspector Robert Lukash says New York police are doing their best. How do you account for the outrage?
Well, I mean, I can understand the pain, and how they feel. And I just want them to understand as best they can that, I know the city of New York, I know the mayor and the police commissioner are doing everything they can to get to get these people back on their feet.
Well, you get the sense, the tone, the desperation here. This is not a problem that's going to go away quickly or easily, and it's something that you're going to be watching throughout the weeks ahead. This is inherently a political problem, as Rachel Maddow pointed out. Take a look.
Jonathan Chait, writing at New York Magazine today, put it very well when he said, disasters are inherently political because government is political, and preventing and responding to disasters is a primary role of the state.
Okay, preventing and responding to disasters is the primary role of the state. The New York Times came out with an editorial to this effect. Big storm requires big government. This is not the moment for governments to withdraw from the scene. It's not the moment for the private sector to tout its virtues. But here's exactly what the private sector is doing. David Koch and others have basically for months and years been countering any effort to try to restrain the emissions of carbon, which have been instrumental in building up the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to exacerbate these storms and make them into the worst. The wealthiest man in New York City is against any kind of regulation of CO2. As for Romney, well, it's actually pretty interesting to see. He's continued his kind of attacks on a whole series of things. During the Republican National Convention, you may recall that he attacked the whole notion of doing anything about climate change. He made a kind of joke out of Obama.
President Obama promised to begin to slow the rise of the oceans.
Yeah, that little smirk. Yeah, everyone's laughing, right.
And to heal the planet.
To heal the planet. More laughter. Big chuckles at the Republican National Convention. He was given a chance to retract it, but no, the next day he goes on the TV shows and emphasizes that he's, in fact, not in the business of stopping climate change.
I'm not in this race to slow the rise of the oceans or to heal the planet.
Okay, let's hear it again, Mitt.
I'm not in this race to slow the rise of the oceans or to heal the planet.
Americans always come together to take on our toughest challenges. And leaders lead. It's time to act on climate change.
Okay, but not for Mitt. Mitt's got a whole series of other agendas. Actually, Bill McKibben called him out on that and said in a kind of note that came out, please explain again why slowing the rise of oceans is such a silly plan, Mr. Romney. Wouldn't that be a way to go? What about coming to the response of needy people through agencies like FEMA? Well, FEMA is one of the things that he wants to eliminate.
Every time you have an occasion to take something from the federal government and send it back to the states, that's the right direction. And if you can go even further and send it back to the private sector, that's even better. Instead of thinking in the federal budget, what we should cut, we should ask ourselves the opposite question. What should we keep? We should take all of what we're doing at the federal level and say, what are the things we're doing that we don't have to do? And those things we've got to stop doing because we're borrowing $1.6 trillion more this year than we're taking in.
Including disaster relief.
We cannot afford to do those things without jeopardizing the future for our kids. It is simply immoral, in my view.
Oh, simply immoral, in his view, to fund places like FEMA. After all, his kids aren't affected, and he has to be concerned about his kids, as he assured everyone he would at the Republican National Convention. You and your family, namely the Republican family, not the country at large. And when challenged, asked 14 times if he would eliminate FEMA, he refused to answer. Very clearly, is that that's what's in mind. What about protecting the city before next time, as today's article had it in the New York Times? What's it going to do before next time? Well, and not just in New York City. As Rachel and others have pointed out, every city in the coast of the United States, in fact, a recent study put it at 180 cities by the year 2100, are threatened by sea level rise, which he says he's not in the business of trying to reverse. Well, this is very interesting and very cynical in a way. You ought to take a look at the outrage that's now emerging among commentators on this very issue. It's really quite revealing.
In his endorsement of President Obama this week, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg wrote, "In just 14 months, 2 hurricanes have forced us to evacuate neighborhoods, something our city government had never done before. If this is a trend, it is simply not sustainable." No, it's not sustainable. Things that can't go on don't. It's true, Sandy was a freak storm, a bad luck confluence of a number of low probability events that could conceivably have happened in some alternate climate that wasn't warming. But this climate, our climate, is warming. And as it does, low probability events like this will become more probable and more intense. Carbon emissions are trapping extra energy in our atmosphere, and with extra energy come more extremes. Higher sea levels, drier droughts, hotter heat waves, and heavier, wetter storms. We need a crash program in this country right now to re-engineer the nation's infrastructure to cope with and prepare for the climate disruptions that we have already ensured with the carbon we've already put into the atmosphere, as well as an immediate, aggressive transformation of our energy production, economy, and society to reduce the amount of carbon we will put into the atmosphere in the future. This is as fundamental as elemental as human endeavors get. The story of civilization is the long tale of crusaders for order battling the unceasing reality of chaos. And it is a kind of miracle that we have succeeded as much as we have, that airplanes fly through the air and roads plunge beneath the water, and the entire teeming latticework of human life exists in the manifold, improbable places it does. But it is the grand irony that in imposing this improbable order on the world, we've released millions of years of stored up carbon into the atmosphere, which is now altering the climate and threatening the very monuments of civilization that we so cherish. We absolutely have it within us, collectively, to beat back the forces of chaos once again. But we must choose to do so. And the time for choosing is now. You are either on the side of your fellow citizens and residents of this planet, or you are on the side of the storms as yet unnamed. You cannot be neutral. So which side are you on?
Okay, well, this was a commentary from MSNBC. These people are not normally given over to giving editorials, but the outrage is so immense that they're reporting on that they're beginning to state things. And if you listen to the daily news, it's pretty staggering here in New York.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Recovery work continues in the Northeast from Superstorm Sandy. There are more than 2 million people who still don't have power nearly a week after the storm passed through the region. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo says the gas shortage that has been plaguing the area in the wake of the storm is going to take some time to solve. NPR's Allison Keyes tells us power continues to be a problem for many people in the state.
There are still 730,000 people without power in New York State, Cuomo says, many outside of Manhattan and along the shoreline. He says he'll continue to put pressure on the utilities.
All these numbers are nice, but they mean nothing until the power is on in your house.
The subways are already running, but he stresses service tomorrow will not be back to normal, and ongoing issues with gasoline delivery and distribution are likely to continue for a number of days. FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate says the agency will be there until everyone who needs housing in the wake of damage gets it.
This will not be done in months. This will not be done in a year.
Mayor Bloomberg says as many as 40,000 people in New York City may need housing. Allison Keyes, NPR News.
Okay, this will not be done in months. This will not be done in a year. As many as 40,000 people will need housing. This is staggering. Public need and private sector morality. Well, private sector morality comes down to this, in effect. It was put by a cartoonist. And so, while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. This is the cartoonist, but in effect it's what the libertarians of the Koch brothers and the political candidates advocating taking money out of FEMA are all about here. Keep in touch on air or online. Thank you very much for joining us.